Hello, I hope you don't mind. I tend to walk around a lot, which the film man hates, but I don't like standing on a stage. My name's Trish Woods, and I'm here today to talk about colour on pewter. Those of you that know me know that I have an obsession with colour. And when I became a pewtersmith, I trained as a silversmith. When I became a pewtersmith, all that stuff I used to do on copper and everything, I really wanted to do on pewter. So I went on this research journey and started to learn. But today isn't about me, it's just giving you some insights into how colour has been used on pewter throughout history. Because it's a metal that people don't associate with colour. You know, we tend to think of it as a white metal. A lot of people think of it as a grey metal, and you don't really see colour. So hopefully, by showing you a few nice pictures and talking about a few little tricks and things that you can think about and play with, it might give you some inspiration about, if you're working with pewter or doing anything, into how that you can get that little bit of something on the surface of pewter. So I'm going to go through a bit of a historical look. We're going to look at, if I move this, right, so I'm going to look at patination and talk about that, and then looking at applied colour. We're going to look, show you a few, it's not very long, so I'm not going to bore you, show you a few things from natural patination, something called artificial patination, and then in applied colour, little tricks and techniques you can use. And then I've got some really weird little samples that I knocked up last week of very odd things that hopefully will inspire you to think, ooh, that looks fun. And I'll let you know which is the dangerous stuff and which isn't, and what you might play with. Okay, so colour. Colour on metal, it's been around for centuries. And there are two ways of getting colour. One is patination. Patination is otherwise known as oxidization. So it's where you oxidize the metal and the natural colours from oxygenation starts to come on the surface of the metal. Yeah? There are some natural examples of that. For instance, when they dig stuff up out of the earth, especially copper, it comes out a funny colour. Yeah, it doesn't come out looking like copper. That is natural patination. It's where the chemicals in the earth have actually interacted with the minerals in the copper and created these surfaces. And then there's something called artificial patination, and that's where us artists come in. And artificial patination is a way of accelerating that natural oxidization and using generally chemicals to push that acceleration and produce wonderful surfaces. And then I treat that as something different to what I call applied colour, which is where you use various things, not chemical, other approaches to put colour onto the surface. Yeah, you can do this on any metal, but on pewter, there's something about the way pewter reacts to things that gives you a slightly different effect. And also on pewter, artificial patination has been a lot harder because pewter doesn't naturally oxidize, especially modern pewter. When you look at old pewter and you see that dark grey patina, that's because the alloy was different than it is today. There was often a little bit of lead in it. If they were naughty pewterers, there was often a little bit more lead in it. And it tends to be that gave you, over time, the grey that we think of as pewter. Yeah? So modern pewter doesn't do that. So in order to get artificial patination, you've got to do a little bit of thinking out the box. Anyway, so that's what we're going to be looking at. Patination and applied. And I'm just going to run through the slides and I'm going to waffle and talk and hopefully it makes sense. And please ask questions. Okay, natural patination. There are four main areas of natural patination. This is on pewter. You've got something called nature's gilding. It's been called that, nature's gilding. In very, very old pewter, especially stuff that had been dug up out of the ground, if that soil was rich in iron, there was a lovely golden patina on the surface of the pewter. And they call it nature's gilding. It was like gold plating, obviously not shiny. And this little thing up here, this little brooch, I'm not 100% sure, it might have been Saxon. Yeah, it's very old. This little brooch, can you see this lovely goldeny colour? And you've also got a tiny little bit of greeny colour in there, so a tiny bit of verdigris. And we think that some of the verdigris that's come on there is because they had a higher copper content in old pewter. The alloys were different. So with a higher copper content, it's the copper that creates the verdigris, if you like. It starts to go with the degradation. So you get this lovely golden finish. And with my own work, I played around with chemical patination to replicate nature's gilding. Difficult, but we got there in the end. So these are natural patinas. Then we have the one that we all know, which is the grey. That comes over time, and collectors don't like you to polish old pewter because they love that patina and it demonstrates the age of the object. And then there's been examples of very old pewter with a white and a green patina. So this is a goblet that was found in a shipwreck. It was discovered, I think, in the 1970s, but the piece is obviously 16th, 15th, 16th century. I think 16th century, something like that. I don't know what the shipwreck was, but they came across this pewter, and you can see that there was white and green and some copper developed. And German analysts had a look at it, archaeologists, they were German archaeologists, and they looked. And they actually started to think that it was an effect of the sea salt and also being buried in the silt. So you've got the sand, which is like a soil, and whatever minerals are in the sand, so you then have to do analysis of those minerals, and then the salt, the sea salt, affecting it. These are all the things that made me starting to think, well, I could do in the 21st century. And then the other natural patination is heat. All metals, when you heat them, you have something called, come on, I taught you, remember what it's called. What the hell, what's it called? Well, interference colouring type thing. And I call it the heat spectrum. So those of you that have worked with metal, like steel, yeah, when you warm steel, you see it going through a colour, don't you? You end up with blue. And all metals do that. If you're heating up copper with a torch, you get a little rainbow, yeah? So you get the heat spectrum. And when it reaches blue, it's hotter than when it turns gold. So it's like a rainbow. It goes gold, pink. Yeah, you should know. This is an ex-student of mine, by the way. I'm seeing how much she remembered. I talked to you about how long? Long time ago. Yeah. So you get the natural heat spectrum, and some pewter smiths have utilised that, so I'll show you some of that, right? So we'll get the chat out the way and show some pictures. So those are natural patination techniques. And then artificial chemical techniques, there has been loads written about artificial patination, all the recipes, chemical recipes that you can do. There are thousands of books. So Hughes and Rowe, that's not their book, by the way, but Hughes and Rowe in the 1980s wrote this seminal book with every recipe of chemicals that you can think of to colour and patina metal. The one metal they did not touch was pewter. No tin, no pewter. And majority of their recipes don't work on pewter anyway. Yeah? So you have to find different ways around. But there are loads of books. And most of the artificial patination chemical recipes actually came from the Romans and Greek and antiquity. They were really good at playing around with their alloys and also different types of chemicals that allowed them to get patinas, lovely patinas, on their sculptures. So they do bronze sculptures and things, and then they'd play around with different things on there, and they'd create colour. So they were amongst the first to develop verdigris, because what they like to do on their sculptures, we see them as bronze. When they were first made, they were full of colour. It's like their marble statues, you know, their statues. When they were first done, they often painted them to make them look real people. Yeah, but we only see them in their natural state because all that's worn away. Quite fascinating. I don't know if some of you have been to Egypt. Yeah, it's the same sort of thing. I'm talking about something totally different. But in Egypt, if you look at their stuff, they paint their temples bright colours, but we think of them as these sort of sandstone things, unless you can catch a bit of the paint at the top of an altar. Anyway, so there's loads. The main recipes for artificial patination were passed down through antiquity, and majority come from someone called Pliny the Elder. And you can still read his stuff from Roman times, because he wrote it all down. And a lot of that was picked up by Hughes and Rose in the 1980s. So if you want to look at patination chemicals, those are the books, and then you have to learn to adapt it to the material that we work with, which is pewter. Okay, this is artificial patination, modern day. Nitric acid is quite good for getting greys. The stronger the nitric acid, the slightly darker the grey. Yeah? So if you use a 5% solution, you get a darkish grey. If you increase your solution, the acid works much harder, much faster, and you get a darker grey. The only thing is you're eating away the metal. But the Japanese are really good at it, because what they do, I love Japanese work, you probably noticed that from my own work. What they do is they resist, so they pull a resist. In other words, they stop out the pattern areas on the object, pull it in nitric acid, it etches, but they leave the grey residue. And then they will seal it with lacquers, yeah, so that the grey is there. If you get nitric acid in water, like a 5% solution, and you add, this is my measurement techniques, and you add a heaped teaspoon of copper nitrate, and you let it dissolve. Hope you're writing notes for when you can. And then you get your pewter, and you go like this with a toothbrush. Make sure you're wearing gloves and things. It will copper plate. So you get this lovely copper. This is an example of the copper plate. So you can get these lovely pinks. Yeah? What you can do is, if you want to get patterns in things, is you can use wax or varnish, and you can paint a design on your piece of metal. You could drop it in the acid so you get the dark grey, take it out, wash it, dry it off, do more drawing with the resist, the stop out, and then do your scratch book on the copper, and you get a multicoloured surface. So you get a surface where you've got the natural colour of the metal, silver of the pewter, the grey of the acid, and the copper plate of the copper nitrate. So can you see how you can start to play around with surfaces to get different effects? These here, this one, that is, I don't remember this one. This one was a mistake, but it's actually beautiful. This was one of my early samples into artificial patination, and I got the Nature's Gilding. What that one is it's, let me remember, it's a small amount of nitric acid solution into which I threw copper sulfate and potassium permanganate. Didn't know what was going to happen. So I mixed that up, put the metal in, left a lid on it, pushed it over there. The trick when you're doing a lot of this play in this experiment, yeah, make up your solutions, whatever it is you're using, yeah, and if you're playing, and my big thing is playing experiment, is that you pull a lid on it, leave it. Don't think about it, don't keep going back. Just have a look. And the next day when I went back, I lifted the lid, got my tweezers and lifted it out, and I had a beautiful gold with red spots that looked like leopard spots. Amazing. Swill it off with cold water, let it dry, wax the surface, and then it's there forever. Yeah? Difficult to replicate where the spots go, but what I did learn, that it's actually the little bits of copper sulfate that hadn't quite dissolved on the surface, yeah, leaves the black spot, which is fun. And most people, you just don't think of pewter looking like this. And when you start using it against the natural quality of the pewter, you get some really exciting results. You can buy solutions. You talk to any of the pewter smiths over there, they know where you can get it and whatever. And there's something called cupra, which you can buy on the internet, and that's generally used to give you a dark grey. It's a ready-made solution that you can buy off the internet, and you can lay it down. It's sort of like your ready mixed nitric acid, because unfortunately to buy all these chemicals you have to be registered in this country, which means you have to be, somebody has to sponsor you to say that you're not a terrorist or something and you're not going to make nasty things. So you have to be registered. So it's not that easy to get hold of chemicals. But you can buy commercial products. They're available on the internet. So if you look at this, look on Google, it's great. This is called Curator. There's a lot of stuff comes over from America because they love playing with all this. They're much more sort of proactive in patination on a hobby level, yeah, than we are in this country. So you get one that gives you a brown colour, so your metal will get like a brown tint. You've got another one which gives you black, and then you've got another one which gives you a bronze. So it's a bit like the copper nitrate nitric acid solution, only it's done in a commercial way that you can buy it off the counter and use it. Always, what I will say, if you use it, it doesn't matter what you're using, a well-ventilated area, yeah? Because even if there's no fumes coming off, you're still dealing with various, substances. So always wear gloves, always wear glasses, always have the windows open, well-ventilated area, or do it outside in the garden. Yeah. So you can buy these, but what I've learned with a lot of these off-the-peg patination solutions is they work better with a little bit of heat. And I found that with pewter, whatever process you're using in terms of chemical patination, a little bit of heat, whether the water is warmer and not cold, whether you sort of slightly pull it on a hot plate so that you're getting some heat. The heat on pewter seems to do something that allows it to react much better. And when I was doing my own experiments for my PhD, my colours were basically using various mixtures of sulfates, acids, ketones, but heat was the major thing. I could mix those solutions, and if I did it cold, nothing would happen. So with pewter, there is something. I'm not a chemist, I'm not a scientist. I don't know what the correlation is between heat, but a small amount of heat, even if you just get a hairdryer, yeah, just encourage these things to happen, you can get some quite interesting results. And these are some of the artificial patination from my own work, because what I developed enabled me, this is actually nitric acid, that one, but these are from the chemicals that I developed, and I could only get that once I got heat involved. Yeah, I managed to get rainbow effects. So yeah, so Google, yeah, look, metal patination, Google, see what you get. And these are some more of my work. So you can see the range of colours that you can get and the different effects. What you also need to do, if you're going to dabble in this or play with this, is to not have any preconceptions. Don't think, I want this colour green, yeah? If you get a green, great, but don't get yourself all caught up by thinking, I've got to do that green like that again. Because on a lot of these experiments, it's really hard to replicate and repeat, which is why industry only picks up on the recipes that will give them repeatable exact products. But I think the most exciting thing is that you don't know what you're going to get. And you can end up with some beautiful surfaces that if you design around that, you can end up with some lovely objects. And you can, I like the idea that you can be surprised, yeah? And don't worry if you can't do it again. Another trick, which is what I'm not very good at, write it down. So that if you did get something in a notebook, you could think, that's what I used, I'll have another go, yeah? Always write it down. I'm hopeless. I've got some little samples here, and you'll notice on the back of one there's crossing outs because I couldn't remember. But I did in the end remember. Right, so artificial patination is one way of getting things, yeah? And there's lots of stuff on the internet you can read and adapt and play. Interference colouring is a natural phenomena. And you can see here, interference colouring is when the light is reflected and you end up with rainbows. Like light going through a prism and you get the rainbow, yeah? Light hitting water, you get a rainbow. So interference colouring is a natural phenomena. We see it on bubbles, we see it on oil. You know, when the oil on, everywhere you go, oil on water, you get this lovely rainbow. And we see it on metal. So as I said before, heat, you can get the rainbow effect. But there's been some research into interference colouring, and we see it most we see it most commonly on something like, have you heard of titanium? Yeah, titanium, tantalum, all that, yeah. And basically what you do with titanium is you pull an electric current through it. You can use a torch, heat it up naturally, and you get those beautiful colours. And on titanium, they're really, really vibrant. You have something called interference colouring from anodizing. Big words, isn't it? Anodizing is a process of placing your metal in a solution of some sorts, pulling an electric current through it, and it creates either a rainbow surface or it creates a clear film that you can then dye, put a dye into that clear film. That's what aluminium anodizing is. It creates a film on the surface of the metal, which you can't see, but when you pull it in a bowl of dye, it absorbs the dye, yeah? Other types of interference colouring doesn't create a surface. What it does, it actually creates that heat spectrum by applying an electrical current, and you get that heat spectrum. You change the current, the colour will change. So you learn what current will produce gold, what current will produce pink, and what current will produce the blue. Yeah, just depends. There's been some experimentation into interference colouring on pewter. And there's a pewterer, member of the Worshipful company that unfortunately is no longer with us, called Tom Neal. Lovely man. And he was experimenting with interference colouring on pewter. And Pewterers Hall actually have in their collection a small dish by Tom Neal that is lovely iridescent green, and that was done through interference colouring. The Japanese also did a lot of research into interference colouring on tin and pewter, but it's really hard to find anything. They kept no records, and the companies that did it tried it and they didn't take it anywhere else. I did some experiments on interference colouring. It's not the sort of thing I normally do. Now I go, these are my notes. You know. Now, bear with me whilst I try and find out. I can't remember what the name of the acid was. Where are we? Interference, I don't know. Excuse me. Right, this is my notes. Okay, so interference colouring, make up a solution of sodium phosphate and phosphoric acid, yeah, or Coca-Cola, because basically Coca-Cola is phosphoric acid. So you can have a jar of Coca-Cola, and then you get your piece of pewter and you put it on either the anode or the cathode. I don't know. You have to experiment. And then you get your electricity current going through. There's loads of papers on anodizing. It's just basically the same. So whatever you do, it's the same setup, yeah. But you can use Coca-Cola, so you don't have to go out and buy different chemicals. And you pull a current through it, and you get these rainbow colours. And I managed to get it, but it was quite pale, but I did manage to get it. The one on the right is what you can get if you practice and really, really serious and want to have a go at it. These things don't happen overnight. You have to sort of have a mindset. But what you can get is something similar to this. This is my cheat interference colouring, of which I used a particular which I used my noxious chemical recipes and heat to get, but it's the same sort of thing. But it is possible on pewter, if you're prepared to research and prepared to have a go, to use interference colouring anodizing techniques to get a rainbow effect on pewter. Be a bit paler, but it's lovely. And Tom Neal actually showed that, but unfortunately it didn't go much further than this lovely little ball that the Pewterers own. So that'd be quite nice. But it is a fascinating process. So that is something you can look at. And heat colouring, which again is a form of interference colouring. With pewter, melts at a very low temperature. So it's really hard to see the heat spectrum. But if you're really careful, with a torch, a little torch, you can just waft the torch across the surface. Takes a little bit of time, just be gentle, don't hold it, because it'll heat up. But you can just waft it across the surface and the gold will start to appear, yeah? The only problem with using heat on pewter with the temperature is that it will melt quite quickly. So there are some makers that have used heat techniques to colour pewter, what I call interference colouring on pewter through heat. There's a guy called Helge Johansson, and I just noticed up in the courtroom, not the courtroom, up where we had lunch, that you have a piece of Helge Johansson here. Yeah, I just spotted it. I went, and he uses heat to create these colours. Now, what I think he does, I might be wrong, and I hope he doesn't sue me for saying it, because I think he's reticulated the surface. But it looks like, because you get the gold first, then you get the pink, then you get the blue. So somewhere the heat has been applied, and then it's carried on through. So you can put something on a hot plate, say stand it up on a hot plate, and the heat will rise. So as the heat rises, the bottom will go through the gold and the pink and the blue, but it will go up. So he probably doesn't do it like that. His techniques are far more complex than I can explain. But you imagine a hot plate there and the heat rising. Then the hottest parts, where it's hotter, is going to be bluey. Where it's cooler, it's going to be goldy. Yeah? And that's where you get your rainbow. So it's really fun to play with that. But you will degrade the surface of the metal because of the amount of heat. So a lot of people that use heat colouring to colour pewter, it's a process called retriculation. It's a way of melting the surface and moving the surface around with a small torch. And when you're doing that, you start to see the colour. Your metal needs to be as clean as anything. It needs to be absolutely clean and grease-free. Yeah? So you need to scrub it down somehow. You need to abrade the surface. I use acetone to degrease. Yeah? If you can't get acetone, then buy the cheapest nail varnish remover you can find, because it's got no perfumes, no oils or anything. It's basically a lower version of acetone, nail varnish remover acetone. So the cheapest one you can find. And that one will clean the surface once you've abraded it and acetone. And that's the same for any colouring technique. Roma Vincent, who's not working anymore, you know her, don't you, Fleur? She uses this reticulation process. She gets some lovely colours. On this slide, you can see where the metal is melting. And if you control that melt, it takes a lot of practice, but if you control that melt, then you can get these lovely colours. And over time, years, yeah, it will eventually fade a little bit, yeah? But it's amazing how much it stays. There's also a girl called Chris Jones, so you can look her up on the internet. It's another, I knew her when she was a student, but she's really has perfected this heat. I'm sure she won't tell anybody, but I think it's heat colouring. And you can see her work online, and the colours are really quite vibrant. They're quite small pieces of jewellery, so she's doing small sections. They're really nice. But Helge Jensen, this piece is quite large. I think this piece is about 6 foot. Yeah? So he does large pieces. And of course he does these. Are they cast, Fleur? I think they're cast, aren't they? Yeah, because they've got this weight. So yeah, quite interesting. So playing around with heat, type of torch I'd recommend, you can buy these little pencil torches that you fill with lighter fuel, cigarette lighter fuel. They're like that. They're perfect for pewter because they're not too hot. Yeah, general torches you buy for silversmithing and jewellery, you know, from that they tend to be very high heat, but they're quite low heat, so they're great for use for soldering, but they're also good for this careful reticulation process. And just play, see what happens. That's all you can do. Right, applied colour. This is where I'm starting to work now, because I don't do the chemical stuff as much, because my workshop, it's the stuff that I was doing is really smelly and horrible, so I don't do that anymore. But you can do some lovely stuff with applying colour. So the main things are things like cold enamel and paint. Yeah. Lacquers, different ways of lacquering, gilding, plating, all sorts of things, and you get some really nice effects. Okay, these are, we've been painting pewter since the Middle Ages, you know, just layering up. The Dutch were very good at it. I think this piece is in the V&A, I think, in their archives. This is a Dutch urn. I remember rightly, I think it's 18 something. You see lovely painting on there. The whole thing has been beautifully painted with cold paints that allow you to, that give almost like a lacquer, and then carefully painted. They used to really decorate their pewter at that period. The Dutch and the Germans particularly used to highly decorate through painting the surface of the pewter. There is more recent Yasemin Tasa. Oh, sorry, Tashebahar. I'm sorry, Yasemin, about the pronunciation. She was I think she did Pewter Live a few years back, and I think her designs were picked up by Wentworth's, which is a nice example of just cold painting. You know, spray painting. The thing with spray painting is you're going to get an opaque surface. Yeah, it's going to be flat. You can't see the metal through it, but it does give a lovely contrast. And some of the best paints to use are car paints because they are hard wearing. Automotive industry stuff is brilliant, and you can spray. Yeah. I wouldn't use, and they do a whole range of colours, and you can get metallic ones as well. So car spray paints, you know, from your local car place, Halfords, do some quite interesting stuff. And you can, again, with painting, you can mask areas out. So you can build up wonderful pattern surfaces by just masking your patterns out, spraying colour, remasking, spray another colour, remask, but leave parts of the pewter behind, yeah, so that you get the pewter living through the colour. Because I think that's important with pewter. You don't want to deaden it off by applying too much on the surface. You want to bring the surface to life. So by thinking about how and where you apply these things is quite important. Her work's quite lovely. There's also something called cold enamelling. You can buy cold enamels. You can get them from Crookson's, anywhere that does jewellery supplies and things. The commonest cold enamel is like a two-part thing. Yeah, so you've got a pigment. It's a bit like resin. So you've got a pigment and a hardener. Yeah, and you put the pigment down and hardener. And there's all sorts of books you can get that, off the internet again, that tell you how to do it. Yeah, just give you the technical stuff. It's not something that I've done much of, cold enamelling. Some cold enamels that you buy, which is a two-part solution that you mix and you apply to, need heat to fix it. Yeah. Not excessive heat, yeah, but it needs a little bit of heat. So you might pull it into an oven at a very low temperature, because obviously you don't want to melt the pewter. But others, they just set, yeah. I always think of cold enamel as enamel paints that you just paint, and you've got air fixed modelling paints, yeah. Sometimes their colours are a bit dull, but they do good ones. So you could use those. And then again, lacquer the surfaces, yeah, so that you protect the surface, but also give it a depth. Because when you just paint an enamel paint onto the surface, that's all you've got. Once you start lacquering over the top, you get a layer of glass, if you like, over the top. So you start to get depth to the way your colour works. And in terms of finish, that's quite nice visually. Yeah, so little things like that allow you to lift the finish or lift the look of what you're doing to another level, rather than just paint, move. I came across this woman called Liz Sabel. I don't know much about her, but her stuff is beautiful. This is all cold enamel work. It's like cloisonné enamel work. So you get your pewter and you can etch out your pattern and then fill your cold enamel into those areas. And and if it's the two-part stuff that you can bake, you can clean off afterwards. So, yeah, really, really nice. Or, you can pull it in very carefully and paint it. But her stuff is absolutely beautiful. I say it's just like cloisonné work. So these are the areas of pewter in between. You can see how she's using the cold enamel with light paint to get different gradations. Yeah, and really very, very fine work. So again, it's all about practice. It's all about playing and practice. Lacquer work is another particular area, and that's probably where my work is at the moment. It's in lacquer work. The Japanese and Chinese have been lacquering for centuries, but what was lovely with their work is they actually developed lacquers and pigments that they applied to etched pewter, their tinware and their pewterware, to actually get subtle colour working. The lovely late Kevin Kearney wrote a wonderful report, which he gave me when I was doing my research. I think it was 1992. You get my glasses. My notes of that. You can tell how my brain works, can't you? The state of my notes. Kevin wrote this report in 1992. I think he went to Japan and he went to factories over there to see how they were working the pewter. And what they were doing is they were producing tinted lacquers. So they'd etch the object, yeah, and then they would apply the lacquer to the etched parts. They'd clean it up so it wasn't black or anything like that, and they'd apply the lacquer to the etched parts. But because the lacquer is so hard wearing, you could polish around and it wouldn't affect, and clean off areas, if you know what I mean. So this is what they used to do. I have to write this down. Where is it? Right. They'd have their lacquer, and they make their own lacquers, so they're really quite interesting recipes that they make for their lacquers, which I don't know much about, but anyway. They'd add copper oxide to the lacquer, and that would give sage green. This isn't a very good picture, but can you just see the greeny tint? Yeah, so they get these wonderful tints on their work. So sage green. So copper oxide gives you sage green. Chromium oxide gives you gold, like a golden bronze effect. And ferric oxide gives you pink. And carbon black gives you dark grey. So they would mix those chemicals into the lacquers and then apply them to the surface, and then they'd rub back and polish the pewter bit. And these are some examples of some of it, old and new. So this is a Chinese tea caddy. I think it's around about the 1800s. So this has had the pink lacquer, and also what they've done is they've picked up. They often gilded as well, or patinated a bronze into it. This one you can see better. This has been etched, and this one's got the bronze tint lacquer on it. It's quite lovely, another tea caddy. These are the ones that Kevin Kearney was looking at in 1992. So you can see a slight pinky effect and a greeny effect. I apologise about the quality of the image. I just can't get a better one. It's only a small image. This is contemporary lacquer work from Japan. These are Asaka Naniwa, who are doing the similar things by producing a lacquer and adding pigments to it. And you can do this. You can use drawing ink, which comes in lovely colours. Yeah, you don't have to go out and get chemicals. So if you get some drawing inks and you mix it with lacquer, yeah, just carefully, just a little bit at a time, then you're going to tint the lacquer. Yeah, so you can apply a tint onto the lacquer. Dead simple, not clever. And so you can do things. So you can have a real play. Because then if you're using things like drawing inks into lacquer, you mix your own colours. And who knows what happens. You could etch it. You could put your cold enamel on there, just a little bit, and you could put your tinted lacquers over the top. You imagine what you're doing to the surface then. Can you imagine? Layering. Once you start layering, it starts to get exciting. So just think, you know, what you... No book can tell you that. All a book can do is tell you the basics. This, in your own heads, can allow you to play and experiment and take it to another level and give you an individual quality so that your work is your work. Yeah. So yeah, the type of lacquer they use, which I'd never heard of, it's obviously their own. The Naninwa piece, which I think is lovely, this is contemporary. It's on sale now on their website. They use something called Tsugaru lacquer. But yeah, so it's obviously a particular type of lacquer that they put their pigments into. And I just think it's lovely the way that they grade it. And these are quite nice, the Osaka Suzuki, where it's hammer texture, and then the lacquer is put within that. So where you've got the deeper recesses on the pewter, the lacquer is thicker, so you get a darker colour, yeah, to what it is on the initial surface. I put this piece in. This is part of the V&A collection. This is 1800s, circa 1800s. This is German. It's an urn. And this is some of their lacquer work. So this is black lacquer over the top, and then they use copper and gold gilding to create the patterns and things. But I quite like it where you still get a sense of the metal underneath, which you probably see with some of my work. This is, and so I've moved more in towards the Japanese. I've sort of, within my work, I've got a bit of Japanese lacquer work, and I throw other stuff into it, which I won't go into details. I'm not going to give you too many secrets. You put me out of a job. So this is one of the latest pieces, which isn't here, because unfortunately I sold it last week. Well, fortunately for me, but unfortunately for you. And you can see the patterns still are working here. So this is playing around with lacquering, yeah? And I add all sorts of things, different pigments, whatever, into it, and build up the layers. It's what I mean about this building up of the layers. And if you get your lacquer work down to a fine art, it's like water. You can get beautiful surfaces. But I think it's nice if you play to actually try and get the metallic quality shining through, because then you don't lose the quality of the pewter. And pewter has got such a lovely element to itself that you don't really want to lose it. So if you're doing stuff, don't cover it. Yeah, just let the pewter come alive. That's my tip anyway. And then finally, there's gilding. And these are examples of gilding. This piece I love. I love that. It's a samurai plate. And I'll find my notes again. Where is it? It's from the Meiji period, which I think it's the 1800s, not 100% sure. Well, it's samurai platter. It was on an auction site. And this has been gilded. So it was originally all gilded. And with age, well, I think some of the patina is natural. They darkened it off and then gilded. Can you see where they've stopped out? I mean, it's a really old piece, and obviously it's eroded in places. But they've stopped out, so the gilding's only gone in certain areas, and they've allowed the other patina to come through. Really quite beautiful. I quite like it now the gilding's patinaed as well. But you imagine that in its day, when that was just pure gold gilding, gold leaf. And then against the black of the patina, it must have been amazing. These pieces, these are antique. This piece of Art Nouveau. So this is pewter. Yeah, it's been gilded on the inside. You can just see the pewter there, but they've put all copper gilding and they've put lacquer work on it, and they've just gone berserk. But it's such a rich piece, and you look at that and you just think, my gosh, you know, the wealth of that piece. Which I think is lovely because it's taken pewter into a realm in people's heads, which is now precious. Because it's always been thought of poor man's silver, or, you know, I can't afford the silver one, so I'll get the pewter one. But I've always believed that pewter has got its own preciousness. And the more you can do to make it look, you know, like a beautifully designed a piece of worth, piece that's got, you know, a visual value, the more the actual material lifts to different levels. That's me anyway. This is Art Nouveau as well. This is German. You can. I've put the websites on there because obviously they've come from there. It's copyright. But this is German. This is gold leaf. Oh, is that one plated? That one's plated. But can you see where they've picked up oxidized in between? Which is really nice. And that's when I talk about, you know, playing with the surface. Don't just do one thing, just see what you can do and play over the surface. And then I've thrown in a couple of mine, because I do some gilding as well. So it's a pair of earrings, 24 karat gold leaf, but texture underneath, and I make my stuff look old. I don't like it when it's really shiny, so I play with the surface to distress it. And you can, you know, if you're working with patination and gilding, and the distress and the new, you can get some quite interesting effects. And then the piece at the top was a necklace that I made a while ago, and you can get 24 karat gold leaf, you can get coloured gold, you can get coloured leaf, precious metal leaf, and all sorts. And there's various companies, a place called Rights of Limb, but I noticed that their colour spectrum is reduced since COVID, I don't know why. Yeah, so you can get all these things and just play with the surface. Yeah? I think that's it. I told you it wouldn't be very long. Yeah, that's it. I'll go back to that one. Pretty pictures to look at. So what I did, these aren't pretty, by the way. Some people might think they look awful, but they're a bit of fun. I'll pass them around. What I've got is some, last week I did some play, and it's really got me excited again to get back into artificial patination, because you get some interesting effects. Right, now then, before you worry, yeah, about this one, right, it's a stain, it's not a degradation. Because this one, I'll pass it round, this is red wine and salt. Yeah, and people go, oh my gosh, I put red wine in my goblet, it's going to go like that. No, it won't. It'll wash off, but I won't let it wash off, I seal it. But I thought that was quite interesting, yeah? Just pass them around. So, yeah, red wine and salt. I put it in a jar and I left it for a week. And when I came out, it had this amazing stain. So I let it dry and then I varnished it. and it's there, sealed, but it doesn't degrade the metal. So if you did leave your red wine in your pewter goblet for a week and it came out red, don't worry, you wash it off and it'll be fine, yeah? And for some reason, there's something about salt. I find if I throw salt in anything, if I'm playing, it seems to speed up the process, or it does something, I don't know. This one's good, because I've always got this stuff lying around, as you can tell. This is hydrogen peroxide, right? This is my blonding colour, and a bit of salt in that. And when I finish doing my roots, I put it in a plastic bag, I throw a piece of metal in there, sprinkle some salt in, and I get this. But you imagine these on large surfaces, yeah? Against the pewter, masked out with a bit of gilding going through, masked out with a bit of cold enamel. Yeah, use your imagination. Right, this is fun. This is nitric acid, copper nitrate, yeah? The top one I used a candle that I had to hand, and I just went like that. And then this is the one where you throw it in the solution and you get a toothbrush and you scratch it over, wear gloves, and then it goes black and you pick up coppery bits. Yeah? And then you wax it, let it dry, wax it. This one was great fun. So you can see I've suddenly gone infused, and I've got loads of jars in plastic bags in my workshop at the moment. This one, this is potting compost. I was in the garden. This is potting compost, plant feed, and I've got a jar of not copper nitrate left, so I threw I left it potting compost in plant feed. I thought, oh, nature's gilding, earth, bit of nitric from the plant feed, because they're nitrates normally, aren't they? I might get gold. No. I got nothing, so I threw copper nitrate in it, and I got this. If you leave it for a couple of hours, you get a copper plate. If you leave it for much longer, it goes black. But I do know from previous experience, if you swap the copper nitrate for copper sulfate, you will get a greeny goldy colour. And if you put potassium permanganate in, who knows? Right, this is one that I couldn't remember, you see scratching out on the back. This one is copper nitrate in water, torch technique. So you just get a brush it over the metal, get a torch, gently warm it so that it evaporates, yeah? And the more you do it, normally with copper nitrate in water, if it was on copper, you'd get verdigris. On pewter, you don't, right? Don't work the same. But what this has got is a lovely, I really like this. This is shades of black. Remind me, I just see that on a really large scale. It reminds me of a William Turnbull abstract expressionist, British abstract expressionist. There's a painting, it used to be in Liverpool, massive. Shades of black. You look at it and you go, it's just black. But the more you look at it, it's shades of black. And that reminds me of that. So I'm really tempted to do a large platter with shades of black, and then I think that'd be quite interesting. Okay, this is heat. So the gold I did just with the torch. You can actually start to see the degradation, but you can get the gold just with a torch. And this one, where I've got some pink and blue coming, that's done in the oven. And then the bright blue comes when it starts to melt. So if you really clean up some metal and you put it in the oven on a baking tray, yeah, set it around about 220 degrees. So when you finish cooking, you know, whatever, about 220 degrees, and keep an eye on it. It takes a good hour and a half. So I don't know what with the energy crisis, I don't know if that's good, but anyway. And it'll go gold, and you leave it a bit longer, and you'll see the pink coming through. When you get to the blue, it's when it melts. But on that one, I got to the blue and I moved it out the oven too quick, so I got a funny mark in the middle. But if I'd have been really careful, I might have got a plain surface. And this is the nature's gilding that I managed to get chemically. Yeah. So it just shows that you can just play. It's not difficult. It's not difficult. And you can get some interesting results. But you just need an open mind, and you just need to see what's possible. When I first started, I just got everything out the kitchen cupboard. Tomato sauce, vinegar, anything. Throw a bit of salt in, bit of heat, who knows? Yeah? That's me. Any questions? You're all going to go home and play now, aren't you? You can get your pewter from various places. Pewter Sheet Company is good. Okay. Thank you very much.